To begin, there is a parable that is told by Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. He was one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich, who himself was the follower, the student of the Baal Shem Tov, who took over the Hasidic movement after the Baal Shem Tov passed away. And Rabbi Nachman gives this analogy that there was a king of a large kingdom, and one day his advisor comes to him and says, we have a very serious problem because there is a blight on the wheat. And whoever eats the wheat is going to go insane. So the king was very, very concerned. He says, you mean the whole nation is going to go mad? So he said, yes, everyone's going to go mad. The king says, what should we do? So the advisor says, I have an idea. We can't tell people not to eat, because if they don't eat, then they'll starve. They'll have to eat the wheat, and they will go sane. But you and I will not eat the wheat. So the king says, and we'll remain sane. So the king says to him, it sounds like a good idea, but it doesn't work. If we do that, everyone will think that we've lost our minds. Everyone will think the king and his advisor have just lost their minds. So the advisor thinks for a minute. He says, Taki, you're right. What do you think, honored king, that we should do in order to save ourselves? And the king says, I think we should eat the wheat. But I think that we should keep a sign on our foreheads, you and me, so that at least when we look at each other and we see the mark on the other's forehead, we will remember that we are mad. Well, the story is very deep at many, many levels. The Baal Shem Tov, the Holy Baal Shem Tov, says the key to redemption is memory. We all have to remember who we are. At a national level, if Jews think that they are just a nation like any other nation and, are not carrying the baton of what's come before them, the baton of light, then they're falling deep into exile. And at the spiritual, psychic level of the individual, each of us has to know, I'm not this. It's not just me and this body and who am I? This is my front and this is my back and this is my top and my bottom, and that's the extent of my being and my existence. We have to know I am rooted. Do you have something for me? No? Okay. We have to know I am rooted in the heavenly realms. I am actually a part of the Creator and not part of the creation. If we remember that, then we live a very different life. I once saw a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says, if we would remember, if Jewish women and girls would remember that they are a child of Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel and Leah, they would carry themselves differently down the street. Their whole deportment would be different. And the reason is because when you realize that your mother is an aristocrat and one of the greatest people that has ever existed, and that is your mother, just the way your physical mother is your mother, so you carry yourself differently. It means memory is a key to redemption. I'm different now because I remember where I came from, and that memory takes me out of the constraints of the present. So part of the story that Rabbi Nachman is relating is about memory. We will remember that we are insane. But another part of that story has to do with imbibing wheat that makes you mad. And if I can use that as an analogy for where we are today, when we say mad, I don't mean psychotic. I just mean not on track with reality. The word Kabbalah is connected to two words etymologically, to the word lekabel, to receive, and to the word lahakbil, to make one thing parallel to the other. So Kabbalah teaches us to align ourselves with the truth of reality. With the sin, Our back, the spiritual spine of existence, went out of alignment. And our work to come to redemption is to bring that all into alignment. So madness is when you're out of alignment. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're so out of alignment you have no access to objective reality or physical empirical reality anymore. And Rabbi Nachman is giving us an analogy where the way I understand it is we eat of the wheat of secular culture. And that shifts our perspective to such a degree that we no longer have an accurate reading of what's outside of us. And that's why I say, yes, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in, says Rabbi Nachman, Reb Levi Yitzchak, and apropos our discussion, the Jewish woman you take issue with, I take issue with too. And all of us are coming with questions that we aren't even aware of. They are what's behind the eyes. I used to teach study skills at the university in South Africa, and we told the students, there's information in front of your eyes and information behind your eyes. On the one hand, what you have behind your eyes is essential. The more information you have in your head, the quicker you can absorb information that's new to you, and the more connections you can make, the deeper you can go. On the other hand, having information behind your eyes is a big blockage to absorbing what's fresh out there in front of you. As the Talmud says, Kli Reikan Machzik, an empty vessel holds. It's precisely how much water can I put in this cup? Well, about that much. But if it were empty, I could put in that much. I have to, at some level, be an empty vessel so that I can absorb new information. And certainly if we're talking about a paradigm shift. So we're not even talking here about 1 + 1 = 2 and 2 + 2 = 4. That leads me logically to saying 4 divided by 2 is 2, etc. I get addition and subtraction, multiplication. All of that comes logically, even algebra grows logically from that. Where is there a quantum leap? So let's say when we come to calculus, this is already something very different. It's thinking about things in a different way. We want to come to a place that is quantumly different in relating to the role of a Jewish woman. How do Jews perceive themselves from the inside? It's not like an outside, no observant Jew, right, coming and observing and doing some kind of sociological analysis of her role. I think all of us have eaten from the wheat, and all of us are out of alignment. You know, when I was on campus, one of the things I studied, it was a fine arts degree, so we had to study history of art. And at that time, one of the banks in South Africa put on, up until that time, the biggest exhibition of art, African art, south of the equator. And I had studied it extensively. I was also at the time really struggling with, feminism and the role of the Jewish woman. I went into the exhibition, and I'm walking around, and here they have these masks that are supposed to be worn on someone's head in a dance, completely interactive, and it's sitting on a stand with a light on it. Or they have objects. The objects of African art are very utilitarian. It's not like a painting that we hang on the wall and its function is just to beautify the home. And as I'm going around, I thought no matter how hard the curator of this exhibition tried, he or she didn't capture what the art is about. We're looking at it like Westerners from the outside to the inside. And suddenly there was like that ping moment where I got it. That's how I look at Jewish woman, from the outside to the inside. I look at her, someone standing on a museum stand with a light on top of her, and this is what she is, and it's totally out of context. And began to think about, where were my questions really coming from? What was really bothering me about who I thought she was? Now, all of us have our surface questions and our deeper questions and our root questions. Having a real teacher is a blessing, because real teachers help you discover your questions. They remember what it's like not to know, and they can help a person identify what's really bothering you in this situation. I want to give you 2 examples where it was clear to me that women had not come to their root question, or at least weren't articulating it to me. I once gave a lecture in a certain place. I walk in and it was around Purim time. And there was a woman in the audience. She started asking questions quite early on in the lecture. Now you can listen to the tone with which someone asks a question, and you can hear, is this compelled? Is the ground zero, the point of departure of this question, philosophical, or is it from the heart? And the degree of pain in the question showed me that this is something else. And she was saying, you know, this is ridiculous. Vashti was maligned. She was the real feminist. You know, the rabbis, the way they look at women and they limit them, on and on throughout the lecture. And I didn't react at all. I mean, I tried to answer her, but one of the key signs is when you give someone an answer and it does nothing, and rationally, philosophically, it makes sense, but it's not filling a gap inside of the person, because the question is emotionally driven. That is its wellspring. So I waited, and at the end of that evening, there were questions and answers in the formal lecture part, and then afterwards people came to me privately. She waited. And at the very end of that period, she was the last person who came to speak to me. She starts speaking and she says, you know, I got involved with a man. She said, I think that she was 28. And he kept on telling me that he was going to marry me. And 1 year went to another year, to another year. I stayed with him for 12 years, waiting for him to marry me. And he left me 2 years ago. And I'm completely alone. Now, he was a Jewish man. Her parents were both survivors of the Holocaust. She was very much alone. And she had met a non-Jewish man who was interested in her, and it was very difficult for her to meet Jewish men. She just hadn't met them. And her real question was, why do I have to be alone because I'm a Jew? I can't betray my parents after what they went through, but I don't want to go through the rest of my life alone like this. What am I saying over here? She asked questions at one level, but that wasn't her real question. It was something deeper. That's what I want for us to be able to do today. To go to the root of what are our cultural assumptions? What is our ethnocentric lens that is preventing us from having access? I'll give one other example, where I once sat with a woman in a sukkah, and she had real issues with the role of Jewish women. Why can't they lead a sermon, and why can't they read from the Torah? And I'm going through, explaining according to Jewish law and philosophy and spirituality where things are at and why I understand the way they are, or what I understand is the reasoning. And this woman, we keep on talking and keep on talking, and I'm thinking to myself, she hasn't yet asked me her question. But I can't find that question. I'm looking, it's like a bee for honey, and like waiting, listening. What do I hear? What? Can't find it. Around 2 a.m., she tells me she has a very long menstrual cycle. She has heard that there are laws of family purity. A woman has to wait for her cycle to end, then wait 7 days, and then immerse in a mikveh to resume relations. And she is very much afraid that if she becomes observant, takes on Torah law, she will not be able to have children when she gets married. I was like, oh, so that's your question. Thanks for telling me. This took like 4 hours. Could you have told me at 11 o'clock, whatever it was, 3 hours? We all do that. We all have our deeper questions. And I think that there are two cultural assumptions that prevent us from having access to who the woman is. I would like to explore those for a while, and then we can take questions. The first is this, or let's say what both are and then go into them. The way secular or Western society looks at the realm of the physical is very different from the way Jews do. So our first ethnocentric lens has to do with the relationship between matter and spirit, physical and spiritual. And the second cultural lens has to do with the domain of public and private. How are those different, and how are they valued in the different societies, Torah society and Western society? So if we take the notion of physical and spiritual, certainly in the West we have a split. On the one hand, there is a sense that I have to leave behind matter in order to enter into the world of the spirit. And our culture is very divided. There's a hedonistic focus. And I don't mean to limit and decry anyone who is not living according to Torah law. Just speaking about the philosophical underpinnings, the background. Western society is very rooted. Christianity is very rooted in Greco-Roman thought. In fact, if you go to the Sistine Chapel, anyone who has studied Michelangelo's ceiling in the chapel can see there very clearly how much the mythology of pagan philosophy was influencing him and how much it influenced Christianity. So if we go back to Greek thought, Greek philosophy says God knows himself, but he doesn't know the world. Was that Aristotle, I think, who said God knows himself, but he doesn't know the world? The Rambam, on the other hand, says God, by knowing himself, knows the world. So the former is very truncated. There's God and there's the world. Now, how could someone say God knows himself, but he doesn't know the world, which he himself created? Seems stupid to us. He was not a stupid person. He was a profoundly brilliant human being. But what he was talking about is the dichotomy between infinite and finite. If God is infinite, how can he have any relationship to the finite world? The Rambam looks at things very differently. Let's stay with this more Western, Greco-Roman Christian tradition. So we have from the get-go a notion that God is very removed from this world. And what that leads to is I have, as a human being, no access to God. How can I connect with my Creator? And out of that arises the notion of different gods, paganism, or if we would have pantheism, which is taking nature and elevating it to the status of the divine. Why did that happen? Because there was a split between matter and spirit, which arose in a very profound philosophical question, and the Greeks weren't the first to ask it. It was there from thousands of years prior. The world appears to be separate from the Creator. And that comes down in Christianity. What do we find? There's one Mary who is a virgin, and there's one who is a prostitute. It's like, where is that nice girl going to be? Can you be a wonderful person and kind and present and be a fully sexual being at the same time? It seems to be that there isn't really. Now, I know there is a third Mary. I'm not very familiar with Christian philosophy who supposedly brings them together, but certainly in the mainstream culture, there is a notion of the virginal person and then the prostitute. They're completely split, one from the other. Judaism is very different. You see, that has come down in our culture. Later I'm going to be giving a class, The Sacred and the Sensual, that speaks about intimacy. And it has affected intimacy and our attitudes towards sexuality as well. People do not see how spirituality and sexuality are profoundly connected one to the other. Throughout the Torah, you see this correlation. So at some level, the head is the highest part of the body. The sacrum and the reproductive organs are the lowest part of the body. But as we'll explore, they're very connected. So people who are very spiritual have a lot of sexual power and energy as well. And the opposite is also true. But because we truncate it and we split it, we lose access. And when we don't have the two as being connected, then we have aberration. Then there's, God forbid, things like pornography, etc. Because people are splitting off this act from something that is very profound. It's one of the most profound acts that we can be involved in. So this split of physical and spiritual gives us an attitude of physical is less. And maybe, yes, you are a physical person and it's okay for you to be involved in the physical world. But the ideal of our society is to separate yourself out and move to a monastery or to a nunnery, etc. Take yourself out, become a monk or a nun, and take yourself out of the physical world. Judaism, on the other hand, looks at things very differently. I once interviewed an artist who, his name is Mel Alexenberg, and he used to be the director of Pratt Institute. He's had many different roles as a director of arts programs, and now he lives in Israel. But he showed me a letter. I don't remember who was the author of the letter, where the sage had written that the word ruach, which means spirit in Judaism, in Hebrew, is the same as the word chomer, matter, with some significant differences. So let's have a look at them. Ruach begins with the letter resh. Chomer ends with the letter resh. Ruach ends with the letter chet. Chomer begins with the letter chet. In between we have a vav or a mem. And according to one of the systems in exchanging of letters in the Hebrew alphabet, vav and mem are interchangeable. So this sage comments and says, Ruach is chomer. All that is different is one's angle of vision. The perspective, how are you coming at it? From the perspective of Torah and certainly Jewish mysticism, matter and spirit are intimately connected one with the other. We're going to take that further, but let's explore this for a minute. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya gives an analogy of a flame, where the flame is like the soul, God's presence. The wick is the body. And in order for that wick not to be burned up very quickly, we need some kind of substance that is going to be burning, which is oil or wax, etc. That oil and wax corresponds to the physical universe, the things that we use to do mitzvahs. And when we are engaged in taking a lulav and etrog, or we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah, blowing a shofar, putting on tefillin, lighting candles, we are taking matter and turning it into spirit. Ruach is chomer. You know, once, Reb Levi Yitzchak, we mentioned him before, finished the davening on Rosh Hashanah. So he says to the congregation, would you like me to tell you what everyone was praying for today? So everyone said yes, they want to, see what was the inside of their prayers. So he says to them, if you would take all of the prayers of the Jewish people for the whole duration of Rosh Hashanah and squeeze them out, you'd get money. And everyone gasped because they knew they were all praying for money. And then he says, don't worry, if you take all of the money of the people and you wring it out, what will you get? Mitzvahs. Because what are we supposed to be doing with that money is using it for the purpose of the Ruach. The Chomer has to become Ruach. God creates something from nothing. Our work here is to reveal the nothing in the apparent something, to take it back to its source. That means we have a very different relationship to matter and spirit. What is spirit? What is matter? Now, what did the Rambam mean by saying God, by knowing himself, knows the world? How do you understand that as being different from Aristotle's statement, God knows himself but not the world? Anyone? What does the Rambam mean? Yeah.
Yeah, God, by being infinite, he obviously knows finite. Finite's included in infinite, right? He created the world, he knows it.
Okay, you are touching on something. But I want to challenge it. Aristotle's problem was finite and infinite. God is infinite, and infinite by definition is limited by what? Not being finite, right? Infinite has to be infinite. So how can infinite know finite?
But how can infinite not know finite as well? Because it's all-inclusive.
Well, Aristotle said it can't. Infinite cannot know finite because it's not finite. And even in Torah, we have the notion of Or Mamale, the immanent light of the Creator that fills creation. So you have, for example, the eye sees and the ear hears, the nose smells, the fingers feel, not the other way around. That is the immanent light. Then we have an Or Sovev, an encompassing light. I actually once read a fascinating thing in a discourse. It said, why is it that when a person has a stroke, the limb still exists? And that is because of this encompassing light. The immanent light in a stroke is cut off from the particular organ, but the encompassing light is there. So even according to Torah, we have the notion that there is an immanent presence of God and an encompassing presence of God. The question is, how could there be immanent? How can God relate to the world when, as you say, he is finite? Yeah, at the back.
The opposite is also equally incomprehensible. How us living in a finite world can we comprehend
God. Yeah, that's an excellent corollary. Okay, the point was made. The opposite is true. How can we, in a finite world, grasp in any way God? Yeah. Did you have a question?
I was going to say, why are you forced to define God as infinite? Why
Right.
do you want to limit God by saying
He is not.
Okay, so then
Right.
that's
That is the key to the solution. God is essential, and essence is not bound by the limitation of being infinite. You see, when we say God is one, and I am going to address your question because I think it's very important. When we say God is one, it means the whole universe exists within God. He didn't create something outside of himself. The world exists within the Creator in a very abstract kind of way. We're not just saying in a physical way, oh, here's time and space that I can measure it, and that's inside God, who's a bigger bubble and balloon. But in terms of levels, limitation and infinity are nothing compared to God himself. At one level, for God, one death is the same as 1,000,000 deaths. No difference, because they don't touch him. If you go 1 mile towards infinity, or 1,000 miles, or 1,000,000 miles, you've gotten no closer. and that connects to your question. You cannot approach the infinite. It makes no difference. You haven't moved one hair's breadth beyond reality as you know it when you try and come close to God, if your notion of God is infinite. But if God is essential, so the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, and I would really recommend you look at chapter 4 and chapter 5, particularly the analogy in chapter 5 in Tanya. The Rebbe says, Torah is compared to water, and God chose to contract himself into the Torah so that we could relate to him. You're right. Logically, there is no ways that finite can access infinite, and certainly not essence, certainly not God. But we are able to do it by virtue of God's kindness, that he wants us to be in relationship to him and chooses to make himself accessible to us by enclothing the Torah level after level in something that we relate to, an ox and a donkey and a field and water, etc. The Shalah, the Holy Shalah, says, we think the Torah speaks about the physical and alludes to the spiritual. The truth is, Torah is speaking about the spiritual realms and hinting to the physical. But we're here, and that's why I say memory is a key to redemption. We're here in this world, locked and limited by the finite, and we have to climb up. Despite the fact that God has given us the Torah, our sages tell us, Leis machshava tfisa beklal. No thought can grasp him. Now, what does this mean apropos our learning and trying to break out of the limitations of matter in order to connect with spirit? And I want to say this, Judaism is not focused on our being spiritual people. It's about being godly. And being godly sometimes means I have to be involved in physical things, and sometimes I have to be involved in spiritual things. But godliness is the driving key. What does he want of me in this moment? So how do we use this in relation to studying the Torah? And then I'll come back to our specific point over here. All of us are born with a natural state of belief. We are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Believers, the children of believers. It's natural to believe. You know that book, Are You My Mother, where there's a little bird going looking for its mother, falls out of the nest, and then finally it finds its mother and it knows instantly, oh yes, you're my mother, right? We're all born looking for God. God makes us in such a way that we are looking for him because he wants to be in relationship. So we have a natural belief in God. Then we have to move with that and be involved very profoundly in learning, step by step, to bind my mind with the mind of God. And that happens through the Torah. Impossible. I cannot sit on a mountain and just meditate from my own self. Yes, there's profound meditations that we are guided to, and we are lacking in the practice of meditation in orthodoxy. What I'm saying, though, is you can't just intuit your way back to God. And we have to study to the full limit of our mind, of our ability. By the sweat of your brow you should live. You'll eat bread, really sweating it out in our consciousness. And then when we have reached the limit of our own understanding, then we remember the Zohar that says no thought can grasp him at all. Then I have to surrender the limitations of my mind and enter into a different state of connecting. So whether we look at it top-down, God relating to the physical world, or bottom-up, what we see is that Torah's attitude is very subtle and complex. There isn't a division that is as stark. Matter and spirit are profoundly related. When we look at men and women, women are associated more with the body and men with the soul. Although in relation to God, we are the bride and God is the groom. So in relation to God, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, are feminine. But at an interpersonal level, the soul is masculine and the body is feminine. And many people have an issue with this. What are you talking about? These rabbis there they go, relegating women to second-class status. Now, where is that coming from? From the cultural assumption that spirit is better than matter. But what have we been looking at? Not necessarily so. One cannot say spirit is better than matter. Godliness is the goal. And ultimately, why are we all being resurrected into bodies? Because your body is where it's really at. That's why doing mitzvot, God's will in terms of physical commandments, is so important. Because He wants us to take the physical realm of existence, which apparently denies His existence, and reveal there is nothing other than Him. So in the Bible, we see an interesting story. Abraham and Sarah are having a dispute. I told my husband, I said, we're all having the same argument. Hundreds of thousands of Jewish men and women, millions of us, all having the same discussion. What is it? Well, there the details of the argument were, Sarah wants to send Yishmael away, right? She had told Abraham, marry her maidservant Hagar. Hagar conceived and had a child, and the child grew. Her son was born, Sarah's son was born, and she felt he was a very bad influence on her child. He was also very aggressive to her child. She felt he wanted to kill him. So she says to Abraham, the epitome of kindness, send him away. And he says, no, I'm not going to send him away. This is my child. She is a wife at some level of mine. I cannot send her away. And Sarah says, yes, I want you to send her away. Women have an energy that is much more boundaried in the home than men. So men will say, oh, it's no problem to let the kids over. And the mother says, I'm not having those children play with my kids. Or the father says, give them the nosh. And the mother says, I don't want them having the nosh. She's much more stringent, even though clearly every woman has a male in her and every male has a female in him. So I'm not making things black and white. But in general, these are the movements of the soul, of the inclinations of men and women. God then settles the dispute, and He says to Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. And a very important question is asked, which is this. If Kabbalistically Sarah is compared to the body, why is Abraham, who is compared to the soul, commanded to listen to the voice of Sarah? And the answer obviously is because at some level, the physical dimension understands God better. I was recently reading a teaching of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was speaking about the way we access godliness now. And he says, now it's just like hovering around what godliness is with our mind. We're feeling, but we don't really touch, kind of from a distance. But when Mashiach comes, v'ro kol basar, all flesh will see. The eye, the physical eye, will behold godliness. Your body will perceive godliness more than our mind can. So the soul has to listen to the body. Abraham has to listen to Sarah. And when we speak about body-mind, it became apparent to me at some point in my life that for a woman, her body is a mind. Very different for a man, as far as I can tell. A friend of mine says she went away for the summer to a country house, and her husband was at home, and she came back, and she knew she had forgotten to wash a coffee cup that had some coffee in it, and it was still there on the table. Everything was in the same place, etc. My husband says to me recently, is this a meat knife or a milk knife? I said, we've lived together for 19 years, sweetheart. Like, it's time that you actually get it. But there's a different relationship to the physical world. Women, if someone buys a house, are more into the details of setting up the house or setting a table. For a guy, it's okay. I'm not saying that there aren't men who aren't aesthetic. I don't want it to come across that we're a woman who are easygoing about physical things, but I am saying a woman is more connected to the physical world, and not only that, her body is a kind of a mind through which she can know godliness. For a man, that is different. When Mashiach comes and the female dimension in all of reality will be elevated, so then all of us will know God with our body. Of course, we'll also know Him with our mind. And we are taught at that time the entire earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean. Our whole work will be to know God both with our consciousness but also with our bodies. So now, coming back to the notion of the ethnocentric lens and how we look at Jewish women. When women are associated with the physical, there is a certain dismissing of that. And to the point today that, being a housewife is as if you don't have a career. It's just, well, you didn't make it on that track. And not that this is the most fundamental thing that can change reality. It's grassroots, bottom up. If you want to make a better world, you need happier, more stable people, and that happens in the context of the home. So someone could say barefoot, pregnant, and behind the oven, and that is negative connotation. But if you shift the perspective, and I'm not saying that that's the only thing that Jewish women are involved in, certainly not, and certainly not in Lubavitch, where the Rebbe and his father-in-law encouraged the empowerment of women and spoke about feminism from many different perspectives. But being pregnant, cooking food, standing in one's home is enormously powerful. And when we relate to matter differently, it takes on a meaning that helps us not get stuck in that dismissive attitude to a Jewish woman and her role. The other thing that I mentioned is the notion of public and private. In the West, you want your name up in lights. You want to be famous. You want to have tenure. In Torah, the private domain is what is desirable, certainly, and the public is considered an arena of compromise. So I just want to share two stories that illustrate this point, both about the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov once revealed that when he was born, he was punished. He said, I came into this world with a soul equal in greatness to my own, and we had made a pact as souls before coming into the world that we would not cry when we came in. Because being in this world is a very difficult thing. I guess in science people would say we cry because the lungs are opening, right? But according to Torah, we cry because we're very excited to come down to this world. But when we actually get in, it's like, oh my gosh, that's what I was waiting for. There's that Hasidic joke about the soul was being prepped in heaven before it came down. When you come to this world, it's so magnificent. You just, here in heaven, you only experience the radiance of God, but there you can take His essence, not the infinity, the essence of God. And you put on tefillin, you wrap those straps, and you've touched His essence and imbibed it. So the soul is really excited. He's running down through the different realms, the different spiritual worlds, and he sees a soul whose time has finished on earth, and he's making his way up. He says, tell me, I hear it's amazing down there. You just put on tefillin and you connect with the essence of God. He says, you're right, but till you get the money together to buy those tefillin, the soul leaves the body. The neshama geht raus. So it's a very difficult place for us to be. You come into the world and there's this shock. I was so excited to be coming down here, and we cry. And the Baal Shem Tov says, I made a pact with my friend that we were not going to cry. He kept the pact and I broke it when I came in. And because of this, he was blessed with anonymity and I was condemned to fame. Very Jewish story. To be condemned to fame. Look, I imagine that people who are famous also feel that there's the pain and the curse that comes with being so famous that you have no privacy and, let's say someone is an addict, where are you going to go? Where are you going to really speak about your issues? Does it have to be with other very wealthy and privileged people? Can you share with the proletariat? How's that going to be abused? Can you be in a relationship? There's this actor now, apparently, in California. His lover or his wife turned on him. He had called her and abused her, speaking on the phone. And she turned in the tapes. Where are you gonna go in order to be able to be real, to be authentic, to live your life from the inside out? So fame has its power and it feeds the ego deeply, but there's the curse that comes with it. And the Baal Shem Tov was saying it's a blessing to be anonymous. There's a story in the Talmud about one of the sages, and the people wanted him to be king, and he didn't want, he ran away. And because he ran away to Egypt, then they knew that he was the right one to be the king, because he ran away. It's not like politics as we know it, which is taking polls and enormous amounts of money. They won't cut spending on basically advertising themselves. That's not happening. It's the antithesis of how leadership is established. The Rebbe did not want to take on the leadership. He waited for 1 year, and it was his wife, the previous Rebbe's daughter, who said it was incumbent upon him to take up the mantle of leadership. But being in the public arena is considered to be an arena of compromise, a realm of compromise. There's another story about the Baal Shem Tov. He had told his students not to write down his teachings. They were oral teachings. One night he went to sleep and he sees the Satan, the force of evil in the world, not an independent force, but a negative force, walking and carrying a book. He comes close and he looks, and it's a book of his teachings. So he woke up in the morning and he says to his students, "Who of you is writing down my teachings?" One of the students owned up. He said, "Go now and burn it, right now." Now, when you think about how different that is, obviously we need to have a recording of knowledge, and Jews have been super scrupulous in recording their knowledge, but there is a time and not a time, etc. We have to know when it's right to actually come forward and say, now is the time for this thing to be published. Now is the time for this thing to be revealed to the world. In fact, the origin of Hasidus was a period where there was a lot of questioning in the heavenly realms. Is this the time for it to be revealed? And in the heavens they said, we don't want it to be revealed. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, his daughter Dvorah Leah gave her life because it was decreed that her father's life would be taken because Hasidut should not be spread in the world. It wasn't the time. Now, one has to know when to move forward courageously and put that message out there, and when to hold back. In our context, what I'm saying is the Baal Shem Tov was not looking for fame. He was not looking to be a New York Times bestseller. That did not make who he was. That was not his identity. He spent the first 36 years of his life incognito teaching little children. So when Torah says there are certain cases where a woman cannot give testimony in court, and people criticize and say, oh, look at how she's looked down upon, one has to remember a king is also not allowed to give testimony in court. Why? Because a court is a realm of compromise. Anyone who's been in court knows with the best intentions people lie, and sometimes they're deliberately lying, etc., etc. One is compromising the integrity and authenticity of a person. And a woman who is associated with the inner realm, whilst a man is associated with the outer realm, is considered it is considered not befitting for her to be in that place. So our sages say, Ish darko likvosh, a man's way is to conquer. He goes out there slaying dragons. As I said before, folks, each one of us, you could think of a peace sign in your heart, has a male, a female, and a child. Your own inner male, inner female, and inner child. The consciousness of the male is to go out and conquer, to slay dragons and make things happen. The consciousness of the female is about inwardness. Kol kvuda bat melech pnima. The glory of the king's daughter is her inwardness. So you find that men tend to give commands, do this and do that, whereas women will say, let's do this, let's do that, from the time they're little girls until they're bobbies, using language differently. Because men, there's an interesting book called You Just Don't Understand by Deborah Tannen. I highly recommend it. She speaks about genderlects, that just as there are dialects, men and women use language differently, and she calls them genderlects. Men use language to establish control, so they give commands. Women use language to connect, so they hide the command factor in the language, in the communication. Just to mention as an aside, the consciousness of the child is to receive, to be open. Remember I said earlier, an empty vessel receives. The child has that openness, no agenda, hasn't yet been filled with information, takes in and can really absorb new information and think of things in new and fresh ways. So in many respects you could say a genius, an innovator, is someone who's very, very brilliant. Not just a genius, but someone who invents and continuously creating, has kept alive the child and developed the mind. Right? But we always have to have that childlike consciousness coming to the world, wonderment and being open. So now we look at men and women. Women in Torah are associated with a hidden dimension. When the angels come to Abraham and Sarah to tell them, you are going to give birth to a child. Remember that story, those three angels? And then one goes off and the others go to destroy the city of stone. There were different tasks that they had. One was to announce the birth of Isaac. They ask Abraham, where is your wife? Where is Sarah? And he answers, she is in the tent. Now, when we say she's in the tent, she was physically in the tent. But the way of a woman is hiddenness, inwardness, even when she's outside. You know, when I first got married, so I had friends all over the country, especially in the East Coast, and I would say to my husband, let's go somewhere for Shabbat. You know, let's go here. We were invited here, New Jersey, Buffalo, Baltimore. Come on, let's go. And he was like, no, I want to stay at home. And I'm thinking to myself, what is wrong with you? And then I kind of find out that all of my friends have the same thing. Their husbands just want to stay at home. So I said to my husband, Avram, what's the deal over here? The sages tell us a man's way is to conquer and a woman's way is inwardness. And where is Sarah in the tent? But all the women I know want to go out. And all the men want to stay home. So he says to me, don't you get it? You complain to me that even when I am home, I'm outside. For you, even when you're outside, you're still in the home. Men are so outside, they're really yearning to be inside and comfortable. I think it also has to do with hierarchy, because in their own home, they are the hierarchical head, the power base, whereas if they go to another man's home, so then that automatically sets something up. It's a little bit different than for women to interact. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other. We are different and both are necessary. What I am saying is women are associated with the private domain and men are associated with the public domain. And when you come with a Western ethnocentric lens that says public is better than private, having your name up in lights is better than being an unknown, then when you say women are more hidden or they are behind the mechitza, that all of a sudden is something that becomes very bothersome. I want to address one thing before bringing it to conclusion and maybe one or two questions. Why is it that the sages say that the private is more lofty than the public? We looked at why matter is considered to be even higher than spirit. Why is the private greater than the public? And the very short answer is this. Whatever is private is more rooted in, more connected to the source. There is essence or source and revelation. Revealed dimensions, being out there, is taking something outside from the source. If I can give an example from the sun, the sunlight that reaches us is a ray that has come out of the sun. Around the sun we have the corona, which is thousands and thousands of miles thick. Inside of that corona is the actual sun. That sunlight is black. There the sun, we couldn't say it's sunlight, there the sun is black. And it's so hot that if you could pierce the corona, hypothetically, and have that heat radiate out, the world would be consumed. So the corona is protecting us. But you see that the white light that we see is the revelation. That's what we like. We like whiteness and brightness and light. But the real power is where? Inside the sun, in that blackness. Therefore, Kabbalah teaches us that we need to be looking to unite with the source. You know, when you speak to someone, you are connecting with them, but at a level of revelation. When you kiss someone, you're not talking, because that's coming closer to the source. In ourselves, there's the way that I know myself, the things that I do, the things that I say, the things that I think. But there's much deeper than that. Even from doing to speaking to thinking is going deeper inside. I want to become connected to the very essence of who I am. When I am connected to that place, then I can go out with much greater vigor and power and focus. It changes the way I live my life. So this then, I think, if we bring it back to our original point, which is we all have root questions and we all have revealed questions, that for many of us, and it may be that you have to look for this yourself, there is the question behind your question. What is it? What is really bothering you? Is it that women are praying in a separate part of the shul? Well, why does that bother you? Because they're not reading from the Torah, but why does that bother you? You know, someone once said to me, you know, why do you have to daven over there? I said, what makes you think God's on the men's side of the mechitza? Why do you think that? Because the action is going on over there? The action has to happen here, inside of yourself. Whether it has to do with handshaking, with dressing modestly, even when it comes to dressing modestly, anything that is valued is covered and hidden. You know, I was at the bank the other day, so speaking to a manager, and someone had to open up the safe. He's there, I'm there, fully trusted. I'm sorry, we had to get up and leave the office so that they could open up the vault. It's all protected. They were going in to check something, etc. That which is valued, you have your good china, your good silverware, you keep it separately from something else. It's not as accessible. A Sefer Torah is hidden behind a curtain in a closed cupboard inside its own garment. And so too when we speak about the laws of modesty. It's not that the woman is bad or evil, etc. There's a certain value. And covering that is a testimony to the value of who we are. So I encourage each one of us to ask ourselves why, until we get to a place where why isn't relevant, where there's nothing deeper. That's coming to our root question. Having said that, in conclusion, maybe people have some questions. Yeah.
So that Abraham is the soul, Sarah is the
Body.
The word the soul is neshama. We're going with nefesh. Neshama is a feminine word.
Well, this is what the Zohar says, that is neshama. That is why I said, in relation, like when you look at Eshes Chayil, the song "A Woman of Valor," a woman is the physical, like in the physical world, there's the wife and the husband. But if you take that song as an analogy between the body and the soul, the wife is the body and the husband is the soul. Even though it's so that woman of valor, there is the body. But if you look at us in relation to God, then we are the wife, and God is the husband. So it depends at which level. At each level, when a dimension of existence is receiving from above, it is considered to be feminine. That very same dimension, when it is giving to below, is considered to be masculine. In general, we speak about the soul as feminine, yes. But when it comes to Abraham and Sarah, it's the archetype of male and female. So here he is associated with the soul and she with the body. Yeah.
Thank you for talking about this pairing of matter and spirit. I now realize, and perhaps you can just emphasize that this is different from a pairing that I thought was synonymous, which is animal and mind, where the mind is supposed to suppress the animal and bring it along. So apparently these are different pairings.
No, I think that they are connected. The notion, I mean, are you referring specifically to the godly soul and the animal soul? Right. So in all of us, there is also what we could call nefesh hasichlit, the intellective or intellectual soul. So all of us have a part of us that is animalistic, and what defines the animal is egocentricity and emotionally driven. What defines the higher consciousness, the mind consciousness, or particularly the godly consciousness, is absence of ego and driven by thought. Moach shalit al halev. However, you shouldn't have the notion that the mind will rule the heart means I'm going to lock you up and put you in a closet. The animal has to be co-opted. So the Talmud says, Rov tfua b'koach shor. There is much rov tfua b'koach shor. There is much strength in the power. There's much produce in the power of an ox. Each one of us is a different kind of an animal. You could be a sheep or a goat or an ox or a cow, etc. The previous Rebbe says our generation is really the sheep. You can see that. We just follow, followers. So Yves Saint Laurent says that now you must wear celery green it is, right? Someone else says this is how you're going to put your makeup, that's the way it's going to be, this is the car of the season, that's the car of the season. We like sheep, right? All of us have different animals, but our work is not just to destroy the animal. If you look at how a sacrifice is offered, this is a perfect analogy for what we're supposed to do in working with this mind or higher self on our body. The word for slaughtering in Hebrew is shecht. It's spelled differently from the Hebrew word lahamshich, but they have the same sound. Lahamshich means to draw close. In slaughtering your animal, you are actually drawing it close to God. And what does one do? You take out the blood and you sprinkle it on the altar, and the fat of the animal. This animal is actually offered, depends on what the actual sacrifice was, which parts were allowed and which were not. But you put the animal on the altar and you burn it, and the smoke goes to God. Now, metaphorically, what that's talking about is that each one of us has to take our animal and use it for God. Put your passion into a program. So whatever your animal is, I have one child. He's very unusual. He was born with a bris. He's like this godly little boy. He's so profoundly spiritual. And I have another child who is this deep feeling, passionate child. And they're so close to each other. They're very different from each other. But I know one thing. The end goal of both of their orientations is God. And our job as parents is to teach them to put their passion into a program. How are you going to use it? One child, you need to teach them to come down into matter. Not that many, right? Most of us, we're trying to get our children to move from matter to spirit, to connect with higher realms of their own being. But certainly, Moach Shalit al Halev, as you say, the head should rule the heart, is not about putting it in the closet. We have to take every aspect of ourselves and serve God with it. And not only that, at some level, serving God with your body is the highest of all mitzvot.